Hi everyone, welcome to today's interview. I'm Fiona from Blue Tech Wave. We are excited to have with us Max Rebol, the CEO and Managing Partner in Harbour Industrial Capital.
Hey, Fiona, good to be here.
Hi Max, I would like to ask you a few questions about your insights on these exciting developments. First one is, can you share a bit about your journey in the Web3 space and what attracted you to Polkadot?
Yeah, absolutely. I am running the Polkadot VC fund. So what we're doing is we're investing in early stage Polkadot-based project and have been doing that for quite a while. My journey is in the Web3 space is almost like 7-8 years now. So, all the way back, back in the days, I was working for two different investment banks, Morgan Stanley, and then later at Deutsche Bank. So coming more from like a TradFi background, but around that time, I then discovered the Web3 space, invested in Bitcoin relatively early on. That obviously went pretty well. So I started diving deeper down the rabbit hole, got into Ethereum also quite early, and then later into Polkadot. And for Polkadot, the story was that I'm based in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has a very active crypto community already back then. Gavin Wood, the co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Polkadot, he also visited the city at some point, gave a talk there, quite a small circle. I listened to that and it really resonated with me. And that's kind of how I got interested in the Polkadot space, invested myself. And then over the years, I figured that there is something about Polkadot, and we can go into this in more detail throughout this interview here. There is something about this technology stack that really stands out, that makes it much more scalable, much more interoperable. It's a much more future-proof system. And that kind of excited me right from the beginning. And then around 21, 22, actually, I decided to launch a fund together with a partner of mine, with Mario, a fund that invests in the Polkadot ecosystem, because we saw that there is really like kind of a unmet demand here, that there are lots of people who are kind of interested in the space, like getting involved in the space, like investing there, but who don't really know where to start. And Polkadot isn't necessarily the easiest technology to wrap your head around. But if you spend the time and effort to do that, then, it's certainly worth your while. And that's kind of like the background of why we decided to start this fund. And then like a few, family offices, a few other external investors came into our fund as LPs. And we started like supporting various projects in the Polkadot ecosystem through parachain auctions and then also through direct investments. That's kind of where we are. Beginning of this year, we launched a second fund, because the first one is already fully raised, fully deployed, is delivering good returns. So we thought there is like more interest, and then also started to team up with the Web3 Foundation, who now acts as the initial LP of our second fund. And we're currently in the process of raising the second fund. Already have a lot of investors who came in here as well, already started deploying out of this second fund.
Thank you, Max. That's really fascinating. Your journey sounds like a perfect blend of technical insight and strategic vision. Given your deep experience in the Web3 space, I'm curious about your perspective on the broader trends. So what are the key trends you see in VC funding within the Web3 ecosystem in APAC?
So, what I would say, from a fund's perspective, what is quite interesting is like the LP perspective, right? Because I prefer to like think and talk about like institutional investors. Like retail is an entirely different story, right? So I'm not really going to talk about retail. Obviously, retail is a very exciting narrative as well, what's going on in that space. But let me just talk about like sort of the institutional and like LP space. So what we can observe is, especially in APAC, there are a lot of like family offices who come from traditional backgrounds, right? So who made their money in like a non-Web3 technology, let's say, or a non-Web3 industry, shipping, for example, right? Or real estate or manufacturing, right? You name it. And then you kind of have like, let's say the grandfather or the patriarch of the family kind of starting a business in like something, right? And then when it comes to the next generation, what are the new trends? What is happening now in the space? And then maybe they move into a different industry, right? Maybe they move from shipping into real estate, right? That's in Hong Kong, for example, that's very common, right? That we've seen that people making their money in the real estate space, right? And then sort of now you kind of have this, once again, like a generational shift where people go like, okay, so, my grandfather did shipping, my father did like real estate or manufacturing. How am I going to set my mark, right? What are the new industries of the future? And then oftentimes people identify something like AI obviously, right? Everyone's talking about AI, biotech, right? And then Web3. But then these people, these families, these investors, I think they're kind of humble enough to realize that they're not experts in these fields, right? If your family comes from like these backgrounds and then you want to invest in biotech, in AI, in Web3, you have to kind of recognize you're not an expert in that. And they do recognize that. And that's why they like to work with funds, with external managers, people who specialize on like a certain industry, and then deploying capital via these managers, right? So rather than running into the fallacy of going like, oh, I'm the expert, I know everything myself, running into kind of the wrong direction, they like to work with external managers. And I think that's actually a very positive thing. And it's also like, it also speaks to the idea of specialization, because specialization is in many ways something that drives the industry forward. And for us, we decided right from the beginning that we're going to specialize on Polkadot. So, we can now say we are the most active, the most focused fund on the Polkadot ecosystem. We get the best deals there. We have the best pipeline. We know like the builders who are coming into the space, and we usually get like the first access there. And so from an LP's perspective, that's really attractive, because that way you can get early stage access and kind of be part of the pioneers, get access to the first projects deploying in the space. That's really kind of the trend that we observe. These guys, they like to work with us. And I guess that's why we also have so much of the traditional capital flowing into our fund.
Those trends are quite revealing. It seems like there's a significant shift in how investors approach Web3. So can you elaborate on your investment strategy at Harbour Industrial Capital?
We're looking at different verticals. We're basically open to every vertical. But I talk maybe about 3 verticals that I find particularly exciting, right? And when I say exciting, it's mainly in terms of user adoption, right? Like where you can really see like the mass adoption, like hundreds of thousands, millions of people using the technology already. As I said, they're very kind of different things, all of them running on Polkadot. So let's maybe start with gaming. Okay, so gaming is obviously, it's a massive market, right? And there's lots of exciting gaming projects that are taking advantage of the Polkadot blockchain. I give you one example that we invested in. It's called Mythical Games. They're just coming out with FIFA Rivals, FIFA like the football game partnership. If you look at it, it looks like any kind of mobile game that you play on your phone, but it also has like this trading element where you can like trade football players. That trading is secured by the blockchain. The reason why I find that really cool is because it doesn't really feel like you're having to set up like a crypto wallet, your seed phrase. All of that is abstracted away. You can just like log in with your email address or like any other way like that you would log into a game, play the game because it's fun, but then also have these additional benefits of trading assets like virtual items, players on the blockchain. I think that's kind of the direction where this whole Web3 gaming is moving to. Because if you remember, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we had like this whole like play to earn kind of thing with Axie Infinity, for example. And that was like a big hype for a while, but then it also kind of fizzled out very quickly because the game itself wasn't really that fun to play. People just did it to earn some money. But that's not really a particularly sustainable business model. You can do that with a lot of VC money, and then you play and then you earn, but it's really kind of more like business, so to speak. And as soon as the rewards diminish, it's not really that interesting anymore. Whereas like this generation of Web3 gaming, like people play it because it's fun, right? That's the main point of games ultimately, because it's fun, it's entertaining, it's engaging. And then you have these additional benefits on the blockchain. And that's something that we're super excited about. So last year, invested in Mythical Games. They're just coming out with like really cool titles that we're excited about. So that's one example. Second example I would give you, which is something very, very different, is the whole DePIN space, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, which is kind of a fancy term for the machine economy. So like securing machines on the blockchain, opening up an entirely new field of economies that otherwise wouldn't really work. So that sounds a little bit abstract, I guess, but let me make it a bit more concrete. So we recently invested in a company called Peak Network. They are running on Polkadot. They are Polkadot parachain, right? So they are secured by Polkadot. But what they do is they enable communication between different machines. Okay, so what are these machines? So you could, for example, think of self-driving cars, right? They drive around and they generate a lot of data. So for example, traffic data about how busy a shopping center is at some point of the day, day, data about other cars, data about traffic, road conditions, data about the weather, right? So they kind of collect this data all the time anyways. We now are kind of in a situation where in Europe, at least, China is a bit different here, but in Europe at the moment, we are in a legal situation where this data belongs to the owner of the car, not to the car company. That's just like the regulatory framework there at the moment. So the user can kind of opt in to share this data and to monetize the data for all kind of like data mining. What these guys enable is to allow a marketplace to emerge for monetizing this data and getting the owner of the car or of the machine to get a share of that. So what does that mean? Or like who would want to buy this data? One obvious example is like insurance companies, right? That want this data to calculate their premiums, and they can purchase this data in return, pay the owner of the cars. For one car or one machine, it's not really worth very much. But if you have like hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data feeds, the data in aggregate actually becomes very valuable, right? So these guys are kind of connecting the dots, so to speak, and creating new economies that otherwise wouldn't really work. This is just one example. They do lots of other things as well. Let me kind of stop here and give you one third example. That's the last example that I'm going to mention in terms of use cases. It's also a company that we recently invested in called Mandala Chain. They're based out of Indonesia, because your question is also about like APAC. It's a great example to talk about the country of Indonesia here, because what they're doing is kind of working on government services on the blockchain. So they have all these kind of partnerships in place with different departments of the Indonesian government. So, for example, transport department, healthcare department, more generally like identity management for Indonesian citizens, right? The Indonesian government, if you look at their latest like policy announcement, they actually have like a plan to put blockchain adoption right at the center of their government strategy. Now, obviously, the Indonesian government doesn't have the expertise, like how to build all these systems on their own. So they are working with local companies to implement their strategy. For example, get healthcare data on the blockchain. And so these guys, Mandala Chain, are running on Polkadot, and they're one of our portfolio companies. They're doing that, right? So they're working with the government to enable citizens to do all kind of like services that they have to do anyways, renewing your driving license or like getting your healthcare records to the hospitals, opting in to sharing your healthcare data with certain hospitals, running that via a blockchain application. And you can ask, like, why does it need to be on the blockchain? The answer is actually very simple. It's because it makes it more secure. Right? We all know the situation. There were these massive data breaches, and government agencies are not immune to that. So I come from Austria, right? In Austria, we recently had like a big data breach where like passport data from a government agency got hacked, right? And then sold into the dark web. Obviously, that's not great, right? We want to avoid these kind of situations. So the government agencies using blockchain technology to secure data of their own citizens is obviously a very exciting thing to do. And they do it just simply because they want the data to be secure. They want their citizens to secure. And from our perspective, it's also a great thing because it really enables mass adoption, right? If it's a government service, everyone kind of has to use it. That's really how you get mass adoption.
That's really insightful. Your strategy seems very thought out, and it's clear that you're looking beyond just the numbers. My last question is about a topic that's increasingly important in all areas of tech. How important is sustainability in the Web3 projects you support?
Well, sustainability is always like a hot topic. You can define it in many different ways. Like, what does sustainability mean? I don't know exactly if you're asking it more from an environmental perspective. If that's kind of your point, then what I can say is that Polkadot is probably the most energy efficient blockchain. Obviously Bitcoin, which is running a proof of work algorithm, which is very energy hungry. I'm not saying if this is a good or a bad thing, but it's just a fact, right? You can make a good point that it's great to have Bitcoin use a lot of energy, right? That discussion on its own, it's quite an interesting discussion. I mean, it's a fact that Bitcoin does use a lot of energy. Now, the proof of stake protocols, they use much, much less, like orders of magnitude less energy, just for the data validation. And you have Ethereum there, and you have all the rollups. And then you have Polkadot, which has a nominated proof of stake algorithm, which is incredibly energy efficient. Obviously a good thing. And the reason why it's a good thing is because it also makes it much more scalable. Polkadot isn't really satisfied with running like some silly game that is played by like 100 people. We're really interested in running applications for the masses, for like millions, for billions of people in the future. So right from the beginning, we're thinking about making an incredibly scalable system, becomes better as it scales, and therefore it is incredibly important to be energy efficient, right? I can also talk about one aspect that is kind of a little bit related here, which is like the CK proofs, right? At the moment in the Ethereum scaling world, like everyone is quite excited about, oh yeah, we're doing CK this and CK rollups onto Ethereum. But if you think about it, like CK is actually an incredibly inefficient way to use computation resources. And computation also means kind of energy ultimately. Mm-hmm. So it's not a very smart way of scaling, frankly speaking. Yes, you have certain like privacy advantages. It's a technology that works if all you want to do is maybe send like some small transactions like back and forth. But if you're talking about more complex applications, then this is absolutely not a scalable technology, right? Because it's very inefficient, right? It's very inefficient. You're doing like computation that doesn't really make much sense, right? Just to generate like a CK proof. And Polkadot now is moving from the current way from the relay chain model to a new thing, which is still under development, but it's already pretty advanced. So I think it's worth mentioning that. It's called JAM. It stands for the Join Accumulate Machine. And it's a very powerful model of securing computation. It's incredibly efficient, right? And so we recently had some proof of concepts here and some demonstrations. Dr. Gavin Wood, he just recently did this JAM tour. Actually, fun fact, this happened in China, in Shanghai. So he was at Fudan University just a few months ago, and he ran for the first time in like world history, ran this demonstration at Fudan University to run the old computer game Doom, like an old shooter game. He ran it fully on a blockchain. So it was a proof of concept thing to just showcase the capabilities of that. But I want to really very clearly say this is a world first. What does that mean? You're not just sending transactions back and forth, but you're literally running a full game on a blockchain. So this is something that has never been achieved before. Like Ethereum, all the rollups, Cardano, all the kind of everyone who pretends to be an incredibly next generation blockchain, they would not be able to do that. They would be far away. It would be way too slow by orders of magnitudes. Jam, he was able to actually run the full game on chain. Now, where does this lead us? Does it mean everyone is playing the game fully on chain? That's not really the point, right? Because it's not really that there's any particular benefit of running a game on chain, but it just shows how incredibly powerful the blockchain is already. Using smart algorithms here, you can scale this to a next generation, to a next iteration that wasn't even conceivable before. A blockchain ultimately is a bit like a computer. If you think about Bitcoin, for example, which is where it all started, Bitcoin is a computer that just acts as a ledger. I send one Bitcoin to you, you send one Bitcoin to me. That's what it records. So it's a bit like a calculator, right? 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4. Okay, that's what kind of Bitcoin can do. And then we move to Ethereum. Ethereum is already a little bit like an actual computer where you can run simple applications, but it's just one computer. It's not really interacting with others. And now with Polkadot Jam, we're moving into a new abstraction layer. We're able to run applications across multiple cores. Cores are a little bit like CPUs in a computer. So you don't just have one CPU, but you have multiple CPUs that can work together. And that's what Polkadot enables. So it's an abstraction, but it's also a natural evolution in the history of computation. I think people are only slowly waking up to what this is going to enable. It's maybe a bit like the iPhone moment. When the first iPhone came out, you thought oh, wow, that's kind of really cool. But you didn't really know all the amazing things that it's going to enable by combining GPS and payments and maps. All of these features individually, they're really cool. They're really amazing. But only when you combine them together, you can build all the amazing apps like Uber, Airbnb, you name it. And I think with Polkadot, we're currently at the stage where we see all these tools in a toolkit coming together. Some really cool applications are getting built out. But at the end of the day, we're still early. Obviously, we're still early in the year 2025. All the things that over the next 3, 5, 10 years are going to be built out is going to blow people's mind. I'm excited to be in this space, and ultimately that's why we're investing in this space. That's why we're launching the second fund.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. It's great to hear that sustainability is such a key consideration for you. Thank you, Max. Thank you for your valuable insights today. It's been a pleasure discussing the future of Harbour Industrial Capital and VC funding with you.